Welcome to choosing the right art journaling supplies for you.
I'm Amy Marigold with mindfulartstudio.com, and you're watching this video because you've expressed an interest in my upcoming ebook, Starting Your Art Journal.
I'm so excited for you to get started.
Today we're going to be looking at the supply list and walking you through some of the things that you're going to need.
We're going to look at pastels, paints and markers, and everything you'll need. So let's get started by looking at your art journal.
For the most part, my feeling is there really isn't a right or wrong journal to buy. It's somewhat about experimenting and see what you like and the way the different pages hold the different media, meaning like watercolor paint or acrylics or marker.
Here you see some of my favorite supplies, including this journal.
One of the cheapest journals that I buy is this Fabriano. It's less than $5 per journal, and when I use wetter things on it like watercolor paint, it will crinkle the pages, and I personally really like that. I wouldn't want it for every single piece, but I sort of like the sense that that gives with the crinkled. I like the sound. It's just sort of something for me very evocative.
In this piece, I've used a piece of string and watercolor paint to print and laid it throughout the page and then filled in the spaces.
You can see this is a spread where I've also got some gesso on there. It's crinkled a little bit, but not tremendously.
So this is a thinner page journal that's held up well to wet media. Let's look at some thicker paged options.
This art journal has a slightly thicker page. This page I've done a little bit more to in terms of like cutting into it. Again, it's not as strong as some of the other options, but I feel like it held up pretty well. I've done things like folding it over and gluing it. There's acrylic paint on here, and I feel like for my purposes, it's really held up pretty well.
Adding a folded page, a window, or a door can add a lot of interest to a page. Let's look now at some different journal options, including tone pages and watercolor pages.
This is one of my favorite splurges. This is I don't know if you can see it, but it's a leather-bound book with toned pages, which I just find to be so incredibly evocative, and to me it is so fun to start with not a white page. I feel like almost anything I put down on it immediately looks better because it's on this toned page.
This is a stamped background with a mandala drawn in jelly pen.
This is again sort of a medium thickness page. I feel like it takes a lot of media really well. This is again acrylic paint, and then it has some marker over it. I've done some mandalas there.
Isn't the white gel pen great on the dark background?
This is another wonderful leather-bound one that I treated myself to. This is a watercolor book. So you can see this is like one of the sample pages that I do for you in the book. This is a good page for seeing the way that it bleeds, and this was a page that I featured in the blog.
Let's talk about paints and brushes. We'll be using watercolor for the book, but I'm going to talk about the acrylic as well.
Watercolor paint's going to be the basic background technique that we're going to play with. These kind of very simple but very vibrant colors for watercolors, and for art journaling purposes, I find that this is totally helpful, very fun. I'm sure any art and crafts store you can get something similar. In terms of brushes, again, you can go into your store and find any number of different brush options for watercolors. I think I would say I would stay away from like a child's brush because you just won't get the same amount of control. But moving from there are a lot of economic options. I personally like the bamboo brush because they're not very expensive. They're maybe $5 each or something. So it's not cheap, but one $5 brush, maybe in the smaller or medium size, will really allow you to do a lot of different things, because as you get it wet, it will form more of a point, so you can do fine lines, you can do fat lines, and that's why I love them, because I find them super versatile. From there, optional things that you might decide to use would be acrylic paints. And now I don't use these in the book, but I did just want to talk about them. So there's plenty of options for more sort of student grade. This is a Liquitex. They sell some super vibrant colors, which is why I like those. This is more of a artist grade from the same company, Liquitex.
You can see I love playing with acrylic paint. Let's look now at some brush options if you decide to get some acrylics.
From there, in terms of brushes for the acrylics, it's the same sort of story where basically, you know, you can spend a ton of money on really good quality brushes, you know, or you can start with sort of a general pack with a lot of different options. I think in terms of what you may start out doing art journaling, it's not worth it to buy really expensive brushes. A brush like this could run you as much as $12, $16 even. So I would really kind of go with a more economic choice to start.
Now let's look at some dry media.
Oil pastels is another thing that is on your list. I like the Sakura Crepa Expressionist. There's lots of other brands. There's more kind of economic student grade brands that are just fine as well. I happen to like these because they're very juicy. They move super well.
This is an oil pastel mini journal.
In terms of chalk pastels, this would be sort of a higher quality chalk pastel. I bought these years ago and have been using them for a long time. This type, the Pastels à l'écu from Sennelier, they are a super, super rich chalk pastel. If you're someone who does not like to get your hands dirty, you won't like them, or you'll want to use gloves because they immediately start coming off on your hands. That is exactly what I like about them because they're, again, very rich, they move.
I really believe an important part of the art process is getting messy and making mistakes.
The Conti crayons would be another option. They're a much less dusty chalk pastel option. They also do blend extremely well though, so I sort of pick and choose when I'm going to use which type. You can also get a lot of student grade ones that work just fine, and you know, if I was starting it, I would definitely start there. In terms of other dry media, we could try looking at some of the other things like a white gel pen. It is really fun to be able to go over a watercolor page or a acrylic page. Like this one is from Ranger.
You can see how using the gel pen to add dots, circles, or lines or writing adds a lot.
I also really like the Sakura. Again, makes a really great, I don't think you can see it, but it's called Jelly Roll. They spell it with a G. And then in terms of other pens for kind of highlighting, there's gold pens. Like I have this one from Faber-Castell. This would be a little bit more of a splurge, but really nice gold pen for putting in little highlights into your work. You can also do the same thing when we're doodling and sketching with black ink. So like one of the, here's another Faber-Castell pen. You can just as easily, this has a really extremely thin point, which is really great to be able to work with. You can also just use a regular old thin tip Sharpie marker. And those are a lot of fun. I also enjoy the Micron. They come in different sizes and packages. That also has a pretty fine point. And then if you're going with a Sharpie, what's nice about those is that they come in multiple different colors. My portable art kit always has an array of Sharpies in it because they're just super fun to play with. You can doodle, you can draw over pre-existing painting. There's just a lot of options.
Doodling is a great way to explore in your journal. Let's talk now about gesso.
This one is from Liquitex. It's basically, if you've ever seen a canvas before it's painted on, it's the white substance that you paint onto the canvas to prime it so that the paint doesn't sink through. So if you use this on a page of paper, it'll also provide a surface onto which wet media doesn't kind of sink through, and you can play with it in a number of different ways that we'll talk about in the book.
Tissue paper.
Another thing that we're going to use is tissue paper, and you can see that mine is well loved. I tear into it all the time for all different sorts of reasons. And the technique that we're going to use, you're going to want and need very much tissue paper that bleeds. So please, please, please make sure that when you buy your tissue paper that it either says bleeding or that you try it out first before you are at some moment where you're going to feel super frustrated if it doesn't bleed for you. If you buy it at the dollar store, it's very likely you're going to end up with something with a wax coating that's not going to bleed, and you're not going to be able to do the technique that we're doing in the book. So just look for a bleeding type. So that's really all I have to share with you about the supplies. I hope that it was helpful. And I'll be popping into your inbox pretty soon with some more information about where and when you can get the book. So thanks so much for watching, and I'm Amy Maracle with Mindful Art Studio.